So, you've always got questions, little Bob. So there'll always be time for another question. However, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk through an apparent contradiction in the Bible. A prima facie contradiction. So, little Bob, this is right up your street. Okay, so in Mark chapter 2, verse 28, Jesus is recorded as having said these words. Have you never read what David did when he was in need, and and his companions became hungry, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest? Everyone say, Abiathar!
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 Right, so Jesus said, Abiathar is the high priest. Now, just a quick Bible quiz. Does anyone know which part of the Old Testament that's talking about?
Exodus.
No.
Deuteronomy.
It's in 1 Samuel chapter 21. Let's read carefully. Then David came to Nob, to Amhilek the priest. Everybody say Amhilek.
Amhilek.
Everybody say Abiathar.
Abiathar.
Are those the same names?
No.
That's a contradiction, right?
That's contradiction, Bob.
That sounds like a contradiction.
The Bible is corrupted.
Jesus is saying that Abiathar is the high priest, but in Samuel it says Amhilek is the priest. So is this a contradiction? No, it isn't.
Why, Bob?
Here's why it's not a contradiction. If I asked you, brother, to look when the Queen was born,
Okay.
what would you say? Take a guess. For this point,
1902.
right, let's just pretend it's 1902. It probably wasn't. But for the sake of the argument, it's not necessary to know the date. When I asked you when the Queen was born and you said 1902, was she the Queen at that point? Was it right to refer to phrase the question, when was the Queen born? Why? Because she became the Queen. And the title Queen applies even after the Queen is dead to any point of the Queen's life. Agreed? Right. So when Jesus says in Mark 2, chapter 2, verse 28, he says this. He says, have you never read what David did when he was in need and and his companions were hungry, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest? Abiathar was the son of Amhilek. Abiathar was alive at the time that David went to Amhilek and entered into the house of God. I may have to pause for a second because of the siren. I'll try to keep going. Right. So, Jesus says in the time of Abiathar. He doesn't say that David went to Abiathar. All he does is say that he entered the house of God and took bread for his companions who were hungry. He doesn't say that he went to Abiathar. He just said in the time of Abiathar, the high priest. Let me show you that the Bible permits this usage of high priest to people who aren't high priest. If you go to Luke chapter 3 and we read, now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod was tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip was tetrarch of the region of Iturea, and Trachonitis and Lysanias were tetrarchs of Abilene, and the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. Annas and Caiaphas. How many high priests can there be? One. Annas was not high priest at the time that Luke wrote his gospel. Annas was not high priest at the time that John the Baptist went out preaching, but he's described as high priest. At the time that Luke is referring to in Luke chapter 3, the high priest was Caiaphas. But Annas is still referred to as high priest because Annas was still alive. You see John do the same. When Jesus is taken to trial, we read, John chapter 18, we read that Jesus was led to Annas first. And Annas is described as high priest in verse 15 and described again as high priest in verse 16. But at this point, Annas is not the high priest. So just as we do with the queen, we refer to her as the queen even before she was the queen, and even after she stops being the queen, just like we do with Pope Benedict. When he was alive, we called him Pope Benedict, even though he wasn't the Pope. Christ is referring to Abiathar as high priest, even though he wasn't high priest at the time. But why would Christ reference Abiathar and not Amalek?
Why?
Why? Because, ladies and gentlemen, just like you don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of every character of the Bible, and some characters are more important than others, and I'll prove that to you. Put your hand up if you know who Moses is. Keep your hand up if you know who Moses' father is. But they're both referenced in the Bible.
Ah, yeah. Oh, good point.
They're both named in the Bible, but you know who Moses is, but you don't know who Moses' father is. Abiathar was the high priest at the time of David that was known commonly to the common man. He was like Moses in that sense. But Amalek was not known. Amalek was the father of Abiathar. Just like Ruel, I think his name is, was the father of Moses. But you didn't know, and I might have got it wrong, that Ruel was the father of Moses, just like people at the time of Jesus didn't know that Amalek was the high priest at the time of David. It wasn't popularly known. So for the time reference, Jesus uses the high priest that was known to the common man to teach the point that he wanted to make. So what appears for the humanity of the audience and for the realities of how cultures and societies work. And that is an important lesson in apologetics. If you want to be good at apologetics, have an understanding, an emotional intelligence about how societies work, how cultures work, and about the humanity of the moment. Because often what appears as contradictions in the Bible are not contradictions in the Bible at all, as I've hopefully just demonstrated. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen?